and welcome to this NDTV special. Is India's economy finally turning around? That was the focus of a discussion that followed the launch of a book here at Delhi's India International Centre by T.N. Nayanan, chairman of the Business Standard. But instead, Arun Shourie, who was one of the participants of the book launch, used the occasion to launch a blistering attack on the Narendra Modi government. All the more surprising since he was seen, at least until recently, as a very strong advocate of Mr. Modi and his policies. But Mr. Shourie instead used the occasion to claim that there has been no improvement since the NDA came to power. In fact, he said things have gotten worse, even making what has now become a headline statement that the NDA is simply the UPA plus a cow. Arvind Subramanian, Chief Economic Advisor, was also present at the discussion, which I happened to moderate, who made an attempt to rebut Mr. Shourie, saying the measure of how much a country has grown is a matter of debate and there can be different perceptions. But as we shall see in the next 30 minutes of highlights that we are playing for you, Mr. Shourie was unstoppable. In fact, in the individual presentations made by each of the participants, he set the tenor for what was to come when he systematically debunked many of the NDAs and Mr. Modi's pet schemes, claiming they were simply built on hype.
We must examine every claim. Do not believe any figure that is put out by any government. I'd give an example taken from Business Standard. We are told again and again FDI has increased by 40% in 1 year. A.K. Bhattacharya showed increase by 21%. In coal auctions, again and again we were told 2 lakh crores. Aaye gaye. 2 lakh crore aa gaye. And Ishan Bakshish and his colleague showed that actually speaking, that is what would 2 lakh crores will come. That of course includes royalty which would have come whether you auctioned it or allocated it. Disinvestment, I can never understand. लोग कहते हैं सक्सेस हो गया, ओवर सब्सक्राइब हो गया. अरे ये तो बतलाओ कि LIC बेचारे से कितना लिया गया. 90%, 95%, 98% of the subscription has come from LIC or from other state financial institutions. Disinvestment. So the first thing to learn from Nayanan's book and from what he writes and from the culture which he has built up in Business Standard is examine every claim of every government. Second is keep track of every promise. Investor summits होती हैं आज every state is doing investor summits. Nayanan also mentions these new announcements of projects. So I had for some other purpose to examine. So I started examining. So अभी तो तमिलनाडु की हुई है कि भाई गुजरात की इन्वेस्टमेंट जो क्या कहते हैं वाइब्रेंट गुजरात समिट. So what actually happened to the projects which were announced? You can't get it from the Gujarat government. So I contacted the Center for the Monitoring of the Indian Economy, Mahesh Vyas. उसने लंबी ईमेल भेजी कि it is the most opaque figure. And they have been trying to get this, they can't get it. He says, we have an entire floor of people who monitor these projects, but we can't get this. But our best estimate, and he's given several reasons for it, is 20% of the announcements resulted in a project. So if unpackage every scheme, follow every promise, examine every claim. In that way, we will really learn from Nayanan and we will serve the country. We will even serve a government because they will know we are being watched. Because many people don't seem to realize that when I do this, जैसे हमारे वो रंगाचारी कहते हैं कि जो हाइपर बोले सो निहाल. So people don't realize that when they say such things, big things, they are destroying the bird of the government of India, not a government. So we should not, we should try and deter that. And we can do that by learning from Nayanan that not just opinions, but facts. Thank you very, very much, Nayanan.
This is what happens when you don't take Arun Shourie in the cabinet. Let's get a bit of a discussion going. Perhaps picking up from Mr. Shourie's presentation, which, though perhaps he may not have intended it to be, but ties into what I was trying to do as any journalist would with a panel like this, which is to contextualize the entire question of whether the tortoise is going to have its turn or not, with the present scenario and with the promise, as I said at the outset, that this government had come with, and whether indeed we're anywhere closer to that. And can I set the ball rolling with you, Mr. Shourie, that you did a fairly effective job of debunking some of the hyperbole or the hyperbole of at least this government's announcements. But in terms of the actual movement on the economy, and that, as I said, was the narrative that this government came with, that finally now, with all respect to Dr. Singh, that the UPA with all its infirmities had been cast out, and now we're actually going to see some movement. Now, you had said, I remember, I think closer to the time of the first anniversary of this government, that patilon ki awaaz aa rahi hai, lekin khana nazar nahi aa raha. Do you actually now see any sign ki khana parosa ja raha hai, or do you still feel that what we're seeing on the ground is not matching expectations?
I don't know. उसका एक आंसर तो ये है कि अब डॉक्टर साहब को लोग याद करने लग गए हैं. लोग कहते हैं कि वो लोग कहते हैं कि वो सियाना थे सके. So, the way to characterize the policies of the government is Congress scaled plus a cow. So there is
Congress plus a cow.
No, but scaled up.
Scaled up.
But policies वही हैं. Second difference really is that there is a much firmer, clearer belief that managing the economy means managing the headlines about the economy. And this is not really going to work. I was just asking Arvind about how he feels about his tenure, and he was saying he's very satisfied because he has great freedom to work, and these are great issues on which he is working. But I think this is a sort of a subjective satisfaction. Everybody is busy, everybody is doing very hard work, but it is not resulting in the 2-3 big things that were a problem at that time. For instance,
yes.
One of the just give one example, yes. That private sector, one of the critical changes that happened in the last 3 years of the UPA government was that private sector investment fell. Its share fell from, I think, 15-16% to about 11% or so. That became the crucial thing. Now, if you see the impediments that were there that needed to be checked on taxation, tax administration, virtually no change. On banking reform, it has been delayed by a year and a half for no particular reason. So, therefore, this tortoise is a very generous
metaphor.
वो बेचारा सो ही जाता है बाद में. It's not just the hare who sleeps. And this should have happened at a time when everybody was saying कि नहीं अब तो हो सकता है और करने के लिए ही mandate था. This is disappointment.
Before I move on to the others, I want to ask you very quickly, and you realize that you've already given us about 2 headlines with just what you've said so far. But before I move on, I want to ask you very quickly, where do you think the problem lies? Because it's certainly not the mandate. You have the majority. You also have someone who's widely seen as a decisive leader. So where's the problem?
I don't know. Maybe it is in priorities. Maybe it is because the whole truth is not told to our rulers, whoever the rulers are. Maybe that's the problem. For instance, these industrialists and all who meet prime ministers, They don't speak the whole truth. वो बार बार आकर कहते ओ यार कुछ करो यार वहाँ बैठे हुए कहते जी 9 out of 10. So that is one of the big problems in India. And
Okay.
and also,
Yes.
sorry.
Yes, no, sorry, I didn't want to interrupt, but let's get Arvind Subramanian. I don't want to put you in the awkward position of being a spokesperson for the government, which you already said is not the hat that you've come wearing today. But let me at least ask you that in the broad brush characterization of this government as one that has not lived up to its expectation, as one that would set the pace of the economy or of reforms to the level that it was expected to. Would you agree or would you disagree?
I was hoping this would be about the tortoise and not about a government performance, because it's a bit. I think we should focus on the book. But all I would say in response to your question is, Jagdish Bhagwati has a lovely book called Protectionism. It's a little small book. It's a great book, and one of the footnotes there's a little joke that he says that the economist's wife turns to the economist and says, "Honey, do you love me?" And he says, "Relative to what?" So in terms of relative, I mean, have we done relative to expectations, etc., etc. I mean, I think all of us will have a view on what was expected and how much was done and
Sure.
how much was under and over. I mean, I think that one of the dirty secrets of perhaps all bureaucracies is that between the injunction that you must not do certain things and the stricture that you must do certain things, there's the whole grey area for really opportunistic, creative, behavior analysis, whatever. And I think so I've certainly had that space. I've never been stopped in terms of generating and never been muzzled anyway. I've been encouraged to speak up. But
Yes.
then the question of what happened, what outcomes turned out.
Yes.
And the people who make these decisions, who are above my pay grade, obviously operate under some constraints, which I think that it's not my job to second guess. It's my job perhaps to say some of these constraints should be relieved, some not. But beyond the point, I think I can't second guess what these constraints are.
Right. Narendra, you actually in a way anticipate some of these arguments in your book, where the broad point from what Mr. Shourie was saying is that the idea that a change in government will not necessarily lead to a dramatic change in economic vision. And certainly the Modi government came with a catchphrase of minimum government, maximum governance, which you point out in practice has not quite played out that way. So obviously there are challenges which transcend changes in political regime or shifts in political ideology.
I'm not sure if there's any significant change in ideology, and it may be too early to see whether there's change in performance. The comment I think I would make is what I wrote in my column last week, which is the orientation of this government is towards projects rather than policy. You could argue the previous government focused more on policy, and projects got stuck. And this government is trying to unstuck those projects and focusing on them. The danger for them in doing that is that projects have targets and numbers. So it's very easy, the way Mr. Shourie's done, to actually show up the claims against what you've achieved.
There are 2 points. First, on policy itself, the distinction that Narendra has made between projects and policies. One of the problems which is unnerved, which has prevented investor confidence from coming back,
Yes.
has been self-goals on policy, not just projects. Retrospective taxation, nothing clear was done. MAT, it's completely a self-goal for no reason whatsoever. But it created a great flurry. Similarly, to bang your head against the wall with 3 ordinances on land acquisition, when you just leave it to the states. There was absolutely no reason for the central government to get into it at all. A general announcement would have done. Similarly, in this Judicial Appointments Commission, a confrontation has been engineered. and especially by the kinds of arguments which were put forward on behalf of government in the court. It had never happened like this. That even very gentle judges had to take the Attorney General to task every day. So you have created a confrontation. Similarly, the second problem is that in India you can't do things unless you take everyone along, chief ministers and so on. But if I get up every morning and start a boxing match, how can I take people along? So these were self-codes on policy and on execution. And if I may say one point on which I am surprised. You see, there has never been, at least for us lay people who are outside and only go by newspapers or occasional what we get from civil servants, there has never been as great a centralization of functions, not power, of functions in the PMO as now. But I feel that there has never been as weaker a PMO as now.
Why would you say that?
Well, by what is happening. So both things, you centralize the function, but you don't have the, you do not, those fellows don't have either the domain expertise or the authority that Brajesh Mishra had or L.K. Jha had or all these principal secretaries have had. Mr. Verma had at that time when these reforms were being done. Then things get stuck. And finally, even on banks is a good example of timidity. The one thing that has surprised me about the government is its timidity. Slight opposition comes and the reform is dropped. आपने क्या किया banks का इंद्रधनुष 7 strings. अच्छा एक string थी कि भाई private sector वालों की जो private talent है that will be brought into the banks. दो announcement भी की गई of 2 persons. Slight flutter of opposition. And suddenly the banking secretary goes and says, no, we are not going to induct anybody. It's a surprising thing from people who we regard, who were elected. So the mandate was because you are strong, this will be a decisive government, which will carry these things through, and suddenly